Okay, I want to turn now to our second panel. The title of this panel is Models for Making and Implementing Policy. And this is the panel where, among other things, we want to talk about questions of collaboration, questions of agencies complementing one another in their work, those kinds of interactions, among other issues that, that Larry Rothfield would like to put on the table. So the members of our team who would have been on this panel are Larry Rothfield, who's beside me, who's from the University of Chicago, and he's faculty director of the Cultural Policy Center. Susan Bonaiuto, who's the former director of the New Hampshire State Arts Council, is unable to be with us for medical reasons, and she sends her regrets and her greetings. And in her stead, we've asked Anthony Radich to step in. Anthony was involved in this project in a rather different way. He was part of an advisory committee which convened before we went out to make a proposal to the Pew Charitable Trusts, before we went out to Washington State, and was very instrumental in helping us to conceptualize exactly how we wanted to proceed. And as I mentioned before, Anthony is the executive director of the Western State Arts Federation. Respondents in this case will be Jack Williams, who's the chair of the State Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and Judy Lorenzo, who is listed here as Lewis and Clark Bicentennial Liaison at the Department of Transportation, but is also involved in the Heritage Corridors program. Is that right, Judy?
At the time of
the report, you were.
Okay. Was, yes.
So has experience in that area as well. So I turn it over to Larry Rothfield.
Hi, I'm going to take the chair's prerogative to just say one or two things about the question that at the end of the last panel. I was focusing in our study on humanities in Washington State, and I wanted to say that what I found in that area was more engagement, I think, than perhaps in the other central areas that we looked at on issues having to do with minority cultures. We talked to Ron Chu at the Wing Luke Museum, for example, and that's one case where you have an institutionalized culture with material objects, but humanities as a dimension of cultural policy that deals with ideas and values is obviously more likely to be a place where you're going to find the concerns of new groups being expressed directly. And we have Kathleen Woodward from the Simpson Center here, who I don't know if you want to say anything now about it, but
I'd love to say something, but
we'll wait. Yes. So let me quickly say a little bit about what we want to talk about in this panel based on what we think we found in the project. In the first panel, we were trying to talk about how many different places there are where cultural policy gets made, how many players there are, how many more players there are than we thought, how diffuse the network of policy making is. In this panel, we want to talk about what kinds of interactions, interrelations, what kinds of partnerships, collaborations do or do not take place among the different entities that we looked at in doing this project. And one way to begin is to take one of the storylines that we developed in the findings in the book, which is that it seems that there are two broad forms of cultural policy and evidence in this state, one in the service of culture and one in service to other state goals. That is to say, one form of cultural policy aimed at nurturing the arts, promoting the arts, or promoting the humanities, or promoting heritage preservation, the three pillars, one might say, and one in service to goals such as economic development or community development. We found some interesting collaborations, some joint efforts at programming, consultation, lobbying, partnering in looking at the field. And it's worth distinguishing in this description between collaborations that went on within a single area of cultural policy, that is to say within the arts area or within the humanities area, heritage, so to speak. That is to say, looking at cross-agency collaborations that went on between entities within those areas. Things such as the Heritage Caucus, in which information was shared and lobbying strategies were developed, or the Clemente course, in which the Simpson Center for the Humanities and Humanities Washington collaborated to develop that, to put that course into effect. That is in some ways different, typologically, you could say, between collaborations that cross borders between fields, between a cultural agency on the one hand, understood in the narrower sense, and on the other, state agencies that we don't usually, or hadn't usually thought of as being involved in cultural policy, like the Department of Transportation or the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. The case, for example, of how Centrum got created out of a conversation that Washington State Arts Commission had with the Parks and Recreation Department would be an instance of this. Heritage Quarter, which Judy Lorenzo had a lot to do with. The Memo of Understanding on Cultural Tourism that, as we found, according to people involved in it, did result in effective further conversations among the participants, even if it didn't actually yield a program or a partnership in the explicit sense. Where the Washington State Arts Commission and the Humanities Washington's efforts to work with the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction to develop arts education programs or humanities education programs. These are all examples of border crossings between fields. The third form of this would be efforts to develop linkages between cultural agencies of completely different kinds. That is to say, Inquiring Minds program, for example, bring together humanities and heritage. Washington State Historical Society's Heritage Resources Center's Heritage Conference, which brought together, again, people in the heritage field and the humanities side. So that we did find a number of these kinds of collaborations. We also found less collaboration between agencies involved in culture in the narrow sense, but in different silos within that set of parameters. That is to say, if you think of arts, humanities, and heritage as three of the pillars, you would find fewer connections between the central agencies, at least than we thought would have happened. One symptom of this is that when we organized this meeting, we tried to find a date when we could get people to come, and we settled on this date, and then found out after the fact that there is a group of humanities people meeting yesterday and today and down in Olympia, and Jack Ferris will be on the last panel, was the one who let us know about this, but nobody else knew that it was happening, which tells me something about how people are going their different ways, which doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, but it's just a fact to note. We also found lots of interesting cases of agencies innovating on their own without collaborating. So we're not trying to say that collaboration is something that one necessarily needs to do or ought to do, but we're trying to ask, when does it happen and under what conditions does it happen at all? Anthony, would you like to ask a question?
Are you going to finish up your comments?
I think you should.
Okay.
Take the question.
Good. A few comments, because I'm a kind of a fill-in person. I can take some license too, so I'm going to do that. A couple comments. One is I want to compliment the researchers on this report and also Washington State cultural entities for participating. I think this is really a landmark activity in our field, and I'm hoping it does set the stage for collaboration here and hopefully as a model for others. When I think of collaborative opportunities in this field, broadly defined, I think of the fact that we actually have what I would call a lot of cultural policy particles. And sometimes we as particles, because we all are pretty small, begin to think we are the whole thing, and that's part of the collaboration problem. The other thing I see that is something that comes up increasingly in conversations is when we're talking about collaboration and ability to collaborate and structures for collaboration, I think we really need to talk about the willingness to take risks and to have what I call, at times, a career death wish, because indeed reaching out can be painful and might extinguish you and or your entity. So I think we have to be sensitive to that, and I think already comments are made in the first panel about the quality and of the individuals leading agencies and entities, and how that makes a tremendous amount of difference in terms of outcomes. We want to talk a little bit today about incentivized collaborations, and we see that when federal agencies incent us to collaborate, there seems to be collaboration, and yet frequently when there is no incentive, there is very little collaboration. I think I would call for a period of non-incentivized collaboration, some self-incentivized collaboration, and I think self-incented collaboration, because I think it's got to come from within to be truly long-lasting and maybe not just long-lasting, but truly have an integrity and a long-term lifespan that something from the outside that's simply responded to may not. So I hope we can talk a little bit about that, how you all are incented, not incented, self-directed, self-incented, whatever. That should be, I would hope, part of this conversation. There are things that encourage you in terms of collaborations in your environment and things that discourage you. And I think it would be fun to hear what some of those things are.
So I'll ask the panel respondents if you want to say anything at this point.
At this point?
Yes.
I think so. I think generally that's why we're here, right?
I think it's
Okay, all right, okay. Well, I guess I'm a collaborated... Okay, no, I'm a collaborated, self-incentive, I guess. I'm a volunteer. I volunteer to serve on the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation. In real life, I'm an architect, although my business partner thinks in real life I chase after boondoggles, and in the midst of this, sometimes I do a little bit of architecture. I work mostly in the world of historic preservation, and in fact, the Advisory Council of Historic Preservation has as its function to advise the State Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. In addition to that, we also gently pass judgment on National Register nominations, but we'll leave that section function to the past and focused on our ability to advise our Historic Preservation Officer. Within our state and most other states, this office came into being as a federally incentivized process. When they passed the, National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, they set a number of things up at the federal level of government, and I went back and read them, because what I really do on the Advisory Council, there's three types of boards in the state of Washington. One is policy making, and I'm not on that kind of board. And the other is regulatory, and I'm not on that kind of board either. All we do is offer advice. So we sort of listen and live by the strength of our words, and we have to pay attention to what the federal government says. It says that it's the policy of the federal government, cooperation with other nations and partnerships, the states, local governments, Indian tribes, and private organizations, and two, and they say to foster conditions under which our modern society, can exist in productive harmony and fulfill the social, economic, and other requirements of present and future generations. And it goes on to say, in terms of its policy statement in preservation, it's going to provide a little bit of leadership. It's also going to give maximum encouragement. It's also going to encourage both public and private preservation. And it's going to assist. So when you ask yourself, what are they really going to do? They're really going to say, here's some money, go forth and do good things. And in that dual sense of providing funding to the preservation community and providing a broad policy, that's the strength of federal level involvement. So now that brings it down to, and the other thing it is, they created the State Historic Preservation Act, and among other things, they take a little bit of money and they drop it right down to the local level for the Certified Local Government Program. So that's sort of our federal, our sort of governmental state organization for collaboration. When it comes then to the state level, the state has, because of this linkage to federal government, an opportunity to create a preservation plan every 5 years that the National Park Service takes a look at. And in the creation of this plan, the way it's commonly done is that we look to the people who participate in preservation to tell us what it is that we ought to be doing during the next 5 years. So on one hand, we have policy that exists at the state level that follows the dictum of a federal government's act and follows the enthusiasm of the grassroots. And so what the state office then has to do is to not only bring in all this information, organize this information, and create the policy document, it also becomes charged with the responsibility of implementing this policy document. And one of the things that we chose to do, if we begin to talk about now the implementation side of policy, is we said that those people who are active in the creation of this document should also be active in the implementation of the document. that although you might have the most wonderful idea, and that certainly should be included in the 4- and 5-year program in which this is going to be brought into being, these are not the best of times. So as Mary spoke earlier and talked about the dribs and drabs of finances that are available to us in the world of historic preservation, we have to make sure that what we put forth as policy is something that we can continue to utilize to maintain our small little community of preservationists. What that compels us to do is to very jealously guard some of the resources. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's difficult for us to move out beyond what our dictum is, what our policies are. However, because the other side of the coin is because we've also been poor for so long, we're quite used to collaborating. We're quite used to working within preservation communities. We're quite used to building those bridges to other agencies that can assist us in doing that. And in the crafting of this particular preservation plan, we had to look to those very practical partners who would enable us to do this. So seated around the table now of those people who are charged with the creation of this plan are people from tourism who are going to be there, from the state office who are going to be there. We have people from certified local governments who are going to be there. We have people from the private side. We have people from natural resources, forest protection that are going to be there. So what we tried to do is say, in order to realize this plan, who's got to be at the table, invited to the table, and then we said to them, please come, but come only if you're going to do some good for us, do some good with us. And if you're willing to do that, we really can't help but, again, accept with our advice. And so you tell us what your benchmarks are for the achievement of that element of the plan for which you're responsible, and we will do what we can do to help you do that. And so I'm going to close now, and I'm going to turn it on over, because I think that will at least get you through most of the topics that we at least started with. Okay?
Good afternoon. My name is Judy Lorenzo, and I've spent the last 17 3/4 years at the Department of Transportation. And I'm a urban and regional planner, but by osmosis, I'm part landscape architect, part historic preservation, part engineer, part traffic engineer, part park ranger, part economic development, and park tourism enthusiast. And I think what's important is the main function of the agency that I represent is to get people and goods safely from place 1 to place 2 and then back again. And this softer side or non-traditional side or that'd be really nice side if we had the money really lay dormant in our state since 1967 when our byway program was first created. And then the federal government opened a huge door called the National Scenic Byways Program. And 2 years, or a little after a year after that, a door opened for me in my career, and I began the process of learning what that program was about and then meeting the people at the Heritage Caucus. And I met people in small communities, and I met people who had ideas and dreams and projects. And all of a sudden, this federal money started to come into Washington, and I was able to open the door for those people to say, here's this place where you can find the money, 80% funding to do what you need to do. But they did the work like what Jack is talking about. They had the dream, they crafted the applications, and together with the help of several of you in this room, we were able to make investments. Like George Sharp always helps to remind me, we're not giving away money, we're investing in something that's a legacy. And I think the success of that program is not because I never wanted to give up, which is, I think, what Mary said earlier about where you sit is where you stand. And I think without the Heritage Caucus and the support legislatively that this program had by key members of our legislature, the program wouldn't have the visibility internally that it does today. There's also tremendous leadership within the agency that, depending on what the hot priorities are of each biennium, sort of ebbs and flows. And one of our most unusual projects, which was one of our first projects with Willie from the Arts Commission, was these tour tapes. And people started taking notice about how we were able to partner and help people along our transportation corridors, but that wasn't really a primary function of our agency, but we were able to help stretch a penny. And I bring that up because I think if you imagine the most unlikely partnership, that's where you should focus on spending your time, building a personal relationship with that person. I travel a lot with many of you in the room, but a good colleague and someone I admire a great deal from the tourism office is George Sharp, sitting at this table in the front of the room. And he and I, we do a lot of duet conference speaking, and he always says, well, it's passion, perseverance, partnerships, personality, and quality. And I'm rubbing off on him because he added a new P. It's called plan. And he always knew that. But the plan that many of us in this room have been working on, that you hear a lot about, the buzz of the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial, we started out with a plan. And that's been the secret to our success. And I think that the reason that our Transportation Commission entertains a briefing on Lewis and Clark or on these other projects on a regular basis where they request us to come is because of the collaboration. The opportunity that need for a bunch of state agencies to say, oh dear, it's 1997 and Ken Burns is going to release a movie. What ought we to do before the locals demand something of what we should do? And it was out of fear, but also out of great wisdom by a lot of people who that opportunity sort of stirred in our hearts is what could we do, and then we took the risk to pretty much hang out for the last 7 years, and it's been an incredible opportunity to learn about what's important. And a non-traditional agency like DOT, the mountain climbing experience that I've had, and those of you who've helped me with that inside my agency, it's all about changing the perspective of the project. It's not this project some local community wants, it's what's in it for the Department of Transportation, and how can this project help us as a DOT to meet our mission and our goals. And if you can sell that concept, no matter who you are or where you work, to the other partners that you need, it makes a big difference, because all of a sudden they're your biggest ally. A couple of other things that I think are really important. I don't know how many of you have ever read a book called Ripples from the Zambezi, written by a gentleman by the name of Ernesto Ciroli. He has a concept called enterprise facilitation, but I think it applies here in every situation that we face, and that is in line with collaboration. We can't all do it ourselves because we're not all good at all the pieces that it's going to take to pull it off. Plus, we don't have enough cash. His philosophy is pretty simple, yet it goes against the grain of probably what traditional economic development schooling might teach you maybe 20 years ago. And that is, small business can't do it all by itself. Cultural tourism, to a large extent, I believe, in a small community like Riverside on Highway 97 north of Wenatchee, it's all about the store that's there being able to be there in 20 years. And it's all about the authentic things that they sell there. Well, that business can survive if it has the three components that Ernesto talks about, and that'll be how I wrap up my comments. Is that there's a person that develops the project, they have the product to sell. And for us, it's this concept of cultural tourism, right? It's this concept of doing something that's right, that because it's important, and if we don't do it, we're worried that no one else is going to care about it. So we've got this vision, we've got this dream, and we've got this passion in our hearts to do something. So we create what the vision is, and we want to sell it. Then you've got these people over here that are wonderful at communicating and articulating what it is we've got that they need, and saying the what's in it for them statement, and really getting them to gain ownership of that. And that's your marketing and your advertising piece. And then there's the bean counters, and the bean finders, and the bean distributors, or the accountant types that make a business thrive and grow. And I think in a large respect, some of the pieces that DOT has helped to provide in the recipe for our state's cultural tourism policy is we've been some of the bean counters, a little bit of the promoters over here, and we've sort of said, we have a vision for this thing called the state's byway program. And after 12 years, our state has its first scenic byway map. And that's not just a cool piece of paper you fold up and use on a vacation, it's a testament to the fact that the concept works. Thank you.
Judy, could I ask you to, you describe assets that you were able to make use of. These are in the Department of Transportation?
Yes.
Is that right? So is there something about being inside a large department? Because that's a different experience from Jackson, from, I guess, from a lot of people in the
In 1991, I had the unique privilege of helping a legislative staff person write $1 million DOT scenic byway programs in the department's budget. It was an extreme thrill. And she said, well, what will you buy? Oh, all kinds of things. And we made a list. And that began the story of how we matched and provided matching funds for projects like Willie's tour tapes and that 20% seed funds. The other resource that DOT has provided on the inside, and I guess I often think about what I might do if I didn't work at DOT, and then I think, gosh, but who would do what I do at DOT if I didn't do what I do? I mean, that's, you know what I mean? I think it's important that you have an ally. I want to make you laugh. It's late in the afternoon. I chose those words deliberately. Some of you who know me know that I did, for sure. It's important to know how to maneuver through an organization, you know. If you don't understand how the budget gets built, and you don't understand who writes the budget, and you don't understand why the person who makes those budget decisions should care about what it is you're advocating for, you're missing the boat. And I've helped to write different pieces of legislation, and even now in my new role, in July of last year, I switched positions. I'm no longer our state's byway coordinator, and I'm in long-range planning, but I got to keep Lewis and Clark. Thank the Lord for that. I love that. And I'm helping to provide recommendations on legislative issues that are related to that program because of my expertise. And so I think your reputation, once you get inside of a large organization, really contributes in a positive way to that process. We also, in 1995, created a program where for the first time our state's highway system plan had service objectives in it that said that every scenic byway should have a corridor management plan, which meant they would come up with a list of projects that were related to historic preservation, whether it be improving a state park or building interpretive markers along the side of the road, or actually building a full-blown interpretive center. And then we also created a 60-40 partnership program for safety rest areas to build those sites within communities. And so there has been a number of state-funded initiatives that have been made possible internally, but not just because of me. The Transportation Commission has been a continuing positive leadership force in recognizing the value to the local communities in our state. And Paula Hammond, our current Chief of Staff, her and I co-authored the first Scenic Byway Grant way back in '92 together when she was in a different position, and she's taken that commitment to that program all throughout her leadership in the agency. And our new Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Doug McDonald, he really has a passion for the different relationships that we have. And so those resources don't really do you much good if you can't have the voice of the larger policy group to support why we've made that investment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask the audience how your experience has been in trying to do the art of the deal that we've heard these two respondents describe. Come only if you're going to do some good for us, or sell to your potential partners, is two things that were just said. In what way is your ability to do that constrained or enabled by the kind of program that you are in the size of the agency, the kind of agency that you're involved in? Do you find challenges in trying to make deals that you don't hear here, or there are analogous situations that you find yourself in?
I'm on as a deal maker out there sometimes.
Are there any frustrated people, frustrated deal makers?
Let me try a foray into this. I'm not representing Washington, but Mary Thompson said something in the first panel, and I wonder if it carries over here. She said one of the ways to distinguish each agency from the other agencies is that each one has its own constituency. And I think that's very important, and we saw that quite clearly. Does the fact that each agency has its own constituency make collaboration all that more difficult?
You're supposed to respond to that.
I'm Kathy Woodward. I'm director of the Simpson Center for the Humanities here at the University of Washington, and one of our missions is, in fact, public scholarship and engagement with the community. I think I want to return to the first question of collaboration and incentive, though, in making just one or two short remarks. And the first is, what is the incentive for us? And my example is a meeting that I attended just a few days ago called by the Central District Forum in Seattle, which is an organization devoted to African American culture, and the formerly known as Washington Commission for the Humanities, Humanities Washington, to think about how we might foster conversations about Brown v. Board of Education, since the 40th anniversary of that important decision was handed down May 17th. So around the table were people from the YMCA, an amazing organization in Seattle that does so much with troubled youth, the Center for the Book, Washington Commission for the Humanities, the Seattle Bar Association, Town Hall, so many organizations. And what we're going to do is try to foster conversations throughout the year, starting May 17th, here on this campus, with public reenactments of the oral arguments before the Supreme Court 40 years ago, which will be very exciting. This, to me, was, in short, inspiring. That's why, in part, I do this, because I was inspired by the people around the table. That's the reason. It's not going to cost very much money at all. What the expense is in our enthusiasm, our labor, our time, but in terms of dollars, this is not going to be very, very expensive. The second question of collaboration and what is specific to your organization, which was the issue that was just raised. What's important to me now is to understand what my constituency is, exactly that question. In great part at the University of Washington, it is the faculty, which is our most precious and productive resource. What I'm interested in is, in addition to collaborating on these programs, not just adding yet again another program, or another project, but how can I help affect structural change in the university so that the faculty here and the graduate students here understand that engagement with the community is what I call their fourth portfolio. That is to say, not just teaching and not just research and not just sitting on committees, which is known as service within the university, but engaging with the community. If they understand that this is part of their future, they will enact that as part of their future. And so I've been developing programs that essentially, I hope, will affect that kind of structural change so that graduate students here understand that's really important to what their future will be as a faculty member at a community college, at a university, at a four-year school, and will know from the beginning that this is something that will carry them forward. The kind of research and the scholarship that they do can be translated into public venues. That inspires me. Now, what about collaboration? It turns out that collaboration is relatively easy to effect if you have the will on the part of graduate students and faculty members. So specific for me is understanding what my organization, which is the university, can do in this great realm of cultural public policy and encouraging structural change, which of course is no small ambition, as you know. But I think we're really making a difference. We're beginning to make a difference.
I'm George Sharp. I'm the Tourism Development Manager for Washington State out of the Department of Community Trade and Economic Development. And I kind of want to touch on what I think is the disincentive of collaboration. And I've been at the state for 4.5 years. And that is that each one of our agencies have a little turf issue that they have to do in protectionism to make sure that their budget stays where it's at or better. And a recent example of that is the state legislature last year passed a bill that said fish and wildlife and tourism will work together to create a statewide wildlife viewing plan. Well, in putting that plan together, who's going to get credit for what? Who's going to get extra staff? Who's going to get additional funding for marketing, public relations, and product development? And that is a major issue to go back and forth just for those two agencies. And then if you add on, we want to work with parks and arts and DOT, who's going to get each one of those credits? And we've had the cultural MOU since '97. When I came on 4.5 years ago, the committee was meeting, and mostly it was a reporting meeting. And then we had two projects come out of that, the Lewis and Clark project, and we had another project over from Othello to Grand Coulee Dam to create a scenic byway there. And not all of our signers of our cultural MOU engaged in both of those because either they didn't have land that was affected by those, for those land-based, and so we had wildlife participating for a while, but because they didn't have any along the Lewis and Clark, they actually pulled away from our committee and didn't participate anymore. So they didn't have that incentive to be at the table because their public lands were going to be affected and partnerships in there. But they did stay engaged in our Coulee Corridor project, but then the rest of some of our MOU people didn't get engaged in that. And so it's having to have that incentive of getting credit for doing the work so that you can say that we still need money in our budget to keep our staff, to get more money for research, for product development. And so I think that's been the disincentive. I think also is the turnover in state government. We would have several great leaders come on board, and especially at the top, they last one year to 4.5 years, and then they're gone. And it's a re-educational process on my part to go all the way up to the top of the ladder to the director of our unit or our office to talk, why is tourism important? Why is it part of an economic development strategy for our communities out there? And it's a re-educational process to get buy-back in from the top that says, yes, you can spend your energy and time working on collaboration and working together and understanding why it is to be a good partner to another agency.
Of state agencies.
Well, what that says to me on the structure of state agencies is that they have a disincentive to work together, that they're trying to save their butt, right? And so whether it be at the governor's office that say thou shalt have a cultural policy, and that cultural policy says that each one of your units will participate in that, and that there is incentive somehow to participate in that or to ensure that our budgets will remain, and even maybe have an incentive of this is a pool of money, but you all have to figure out how to spend that together on a cultural policy project. Does that answer? Kind of? Okay.
It's a big question.
Hi, I'm Mayumi Sudah, and I'm with the Washington State Arts Commission, working on the Wallace Arts Participation Project, in which we have selected 12, soon to be 15 actually, model agencies that work within the target underserved communities in our state of ethnic, disabled, rural, and low-income communities working on arts projects within that. I wanted to refer to the question that you just asked about whether or not different agencies have different constituencies, because, and this also refers back to this gentleman's question about whether our underserved and newcomer communities are taking part in policy making. I think that different agencies do not have different constituencies. They're all one constituency out there, but they get confused about who we all are. And I think that when you referred to the Central District Forum, I mean, they're one of our grantee agencies, and it's really hard for people who who either are newcomers or they don't have a lot of resources at their fingertips to keep all of us straight. And it really behooves us to work more together and to collaborate more together. And one example of that was when the Seattle Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs and the King County Cultural Development Agency and the Washington State Arts Commission, good thing we've kept our name the same. There was a time when we worked very hard to make sure that our grant applications were the same, basically the same. And that's the kind of thing that really needs to be done for the good of our constituents. There is so much confusion and difficulty out there. I've met artists in the field who don't know whether or not they're an artist in residence for Washington State or King County. They can't remember because they don't have time to remember, but they do know that they're getting a paycheck. So I think that in working with our grassroots constituents and in trying to get them to understand some of the policy and conceptual and policy implications of newer kinds of movement and newer thinking, that it really, really is a resource issue in terms of their time, the amount of time and the amount of time that they have at their disposal to understand what it is that we're doing in so many different ways. So simplification and, yes, collaboration will really help our people.
Thanks. I'm Willie Smite, also with the Arts Commission. And I'm thinking of a collaboration or a way that agencies may be brought together. It's an incentive. I guess a pseudonym in this sense is also an opportunity. But to refer back to what you were saying, it's also a responsibility. And I think our constituents, like Mayumi was saying, are the whole state and people of all ages. The opportunity that I think we're looking at now, and one particular program we have, is arts and healthcare. And this crosses the board, I think, of every agency here. If you've had a parent, or every individual here, if you've had a parent or anyone you know who you've played music for on their deathbed or when they're sick, or you brought flowers or some sort of aesthetic gift to them, or you've collected their life story. All of these things are, I think, a huge opportunity that's coming up on our horizon, in part because a lot of us are boomers and have either parents that are there or we soon will be there in this healthcare scenario, in which I'm finding there are so many artists already involved in providing services to health. There's so many humanists, there's so many historians, oral historians, and they're not talking to each other. And so we're trying to provide some sort of framework for developing an infrastructure and network. And but I think my main point here is more general, that why should we talk? When do we talk? Sometimes it's just an opportunity. The opportunity might come because of healthcare crises. It might come from our own particular age and development.
I'm Josie Turner. I'm with the City of Tacoma. And I think that for some of us, collaboration is an opportunity, and it's building on individual relationships with other agencies. But also collaboration is a risk. And George? Yeah. As George was saying, as budgets get tighter, I think it's a human instinct for everyone to look internally and say, what do I have to hold on to? And what can I, keep so I don't have to give it away? And I think that, I know in our case in Tacoma, many years ago, it was the political vision, it was the leadership, and it was the willpower of a community in and of itself working together that said, you will collaborate, you will do this, you will build new museums, you will bring light rail to Tacoma, you will do public art, you will engage state agencies, you will engage federal agencies. And DOT has been a real partner with us. We're working to, actually with an artist, Vicky Scurry, to put artwork on the freeway through Tacoma, and we're hoping to do that. And we may be the first city in the state, if we can actually get this through, that it works. But it took a political vision, and it took people at a much higher level that could go carry some of the water for us. And I think none of us as individuals can do it alone. So we need to just remember that.
Well, hello. Jeffrey Thomas with the Puyallup Tribe again. I just wanted to bring up a couple of questions for the panel, and based upon maybe some general statements. I guess that my general statements are that we need a task force group that can lead or develop a state-oriented cultural policy partnership proposal. So right now in Washington State, if we're looking at the need for improving cultural policy partnerships, we need the proposal, and we need a group that's going to develop it. So I really hope that somehow we have the underpinnings of that effort right here in this room. Maybe aside from that, or related to it, is the idea of cultural resource management and how it does or does not connect to the cultural policy issues that we're otherwise addressing here. So maybe my thought on that one is that I believe that we would, and is my recommendation, that we embrace, integrate, and provide for cultural resource management oriented issues in the cultural policy, in our cultural policy oriented enhancements. So if we're just going to do cultural policy, great, let's make sure we get a proposal out there, let's make sure a group's doing it, let's make sure that it somehow it's relevant to cultural resource management themes. But my question is, where or how do we initiate and promote a proposal today for optimizing leadership level involvement and participation in cultural policy partnerships here in Washington State? So if that's what we want to do, where's our target?
Do you want me to? Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're going to run just a little bit longer. We're not going to take the full 15 minutes. So. Well, you know, I like the notion of implementation being primary in your critique. I think that if we are going to have cultural resource management, part of the ways in which you can look to that is the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. I mean, that's in the midst of their mandate, both at the federal and the state level. So a part of that discussion is already ongoing. A part of the way in which your question can be answered is to take a look at the current preservation plan to assure yourselves that the kinds of things that you would hope would be a part of it are in fact a part of it. That plan is a flexible document. It's going to be shepherded by about 25 people. Those people will join the collaborative committee that's responsible for bringing it into being. And as their particular as their particular area of interest is actually accomplished and their use, to be harsh, is relatively lessened at that point, then there will be opportunities for other things to come on and therefore other people. So Greg Griffith's in the room. He's the staff person within OHOP that's going to be implementing, who's going to be the staff person to this group. So I would suggest that your first linkage is there. When you begin to move beyond just the notion of the artifacts or the resources that really is the purview of that organization and move now more towards the arts, you're going to have to now, or we were going to have to now embrace a wider group of individuals in order to create a similar sort of construct with a similar sort of plan. I think that in any instance, the plan has to be composed of measurable commodities. We have to have people who are committed to the realization of that commodity. We have to have a guideline that will enable them to do that in a specific amount of time. We need the assurance that that individual will be backed by an organization, because too often events come and go out of being because somebody just gets tired. And unless we have that requisitional organizational support, then the effort too will just go away. So those would be the areas in which I would encourage you to go, and I think Greg's sitting here, and so I think that would be a good linkage. He's right there.
He had a great lunch today, and he's very enthusiastic, I'm sure. The woman in the, from Tacoma, she asked how you do this collaboration thing, and I wanted to respond to that question. And then I have something that's sort of a pot that's been simmering on the back burner of things that I want to get to in response to the gentleman in the front's question here. I wrote down a couple of notes while you were talking, and my answer to that is you do it in several ways. One person at a time, investing in building a relationship, and then creating a few key messages that you repeat until the paradigm shift changes. You know, the rule of 7, maybe it's 700 in some cases, but you have to take small steps. We all have this huge vision up here for where we want to be in 5, 10, or 15 or 20 years. But that's overwhelming to people that don't even get why it's important to try to go there. So you have to take one little bitty step, and then they get to share in the credit of that, and all of a sudden they're liking that. And so that's what's been the success in maneuvering through the DOT for me as well. And then also never giving up, no matter what. And if you do, then you pass it on to someone who's going to do it in your stead while you're going on vacation temporarily. Because if you don't keep talking and there's silence, they think it's fixed. And that's so untrue. And the pot that was simmering in the back is actually taking that cultural tourism MOU that we have that was signed by several state agencies and a couple of federal agencies, and dusting it off and having the summit that it says we should in there, and really asking ourselves, what are our priorities, and expanding it beyond just a tourism focus, but really a cultural policy agenda, perhaps, for our state. Because since that time, there's a lot of strong alliances between the actual staff and leadership in those signature agencies that can really give it the punch that it needs, I think.
One more comment or question.
I think I'm Dan Schmidt with VSA Arts of Washington, the executive director, and we work in the arts by, for, and with people with disabilities. Welcome to our world of holistic thinking, because we have no choice. We bring into this conversation ourselves, social service agencies, DSHS, Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, a lot of the folks that should perhaps be here but aren't yet. Collaboration is what we have to do. I have a comment. I would like to complicate George's life a little bit more, and so if he would talk to me a little bit later, we have a project for the tourism department. And I'd like to talk to Jeffrey as well. We are not probably at the top of many of your lists for collaboration or talking about cultural policy, but we are probably the only agency in the state that is trying to, along with the Washington State Arts Commission and King County CDA, Mayor's Office on Arts and Cultural Affairs, trying to bring the ADA into a little bit more common use in the state, in cultural facilities, and we would like to create a directory of cultural facilities in our state that are accessible. I want to talk a second about that kind of resource, and one of the disincentives to collaboration is that so many of us have so little that it's hard for us to even think about what we can bring to the table or what someone else can bring to the table. There's a group of people from various agencies, arts agencies and VSA, who are now talking about a resource that it would be nice to have in the state, which is a directory of artists. We would like to see directory of artists with disabilities, but wouldn't it be even better if those artists with disabilities were part of a larger directory that included people of color, artists of all types, all disciplines? That such a resource doesn't really exist at this time that I know about, and that's part of the problem. Is we don't know what all is out there. VSA is still finding little pockets of places where people are providing services in the arts for people with disabilities that don't know about us and we don't know about them. So I'm just always have to assume that they're out there. Am I making a point? we have to think about how even small organizations can help us. I'm going to give an instance. I was talking to someone at an arts agency, not to be named, who was talking about how the finances, the cuts were hitting them in their department. And I said to them, not thinking about it too much, well, maybe we can help you. Let's think about that. How can VSA help you? We are part of we're a state affiliate of a national organization, and there are all these national initiatives that are happening. Arts and education initiatives, cultural access initiatives. Tying some of you into those might be a lot of help to you. Might get something done. If we can participate in a program that creates a directory of cultural facilities, it doesn't have to be just about accessible cultural facilities. It could just be the list, and I don't know if there are very many, but the list of cultural facilities in the state of Washington. It just happens to say how they're accessible, so that people with disabilities or their relatives or their caregivers know that they can get in that space, they can see a program that communicates to them. So I guess that's the thought I'm trying to say, is that think about the smaller groups, broaden your vision of who you could collaborate with. And the other piece is, when you're going to do a collaboration, I've learned by hard lesson, you have to get it down on paper.
Great.
Everybody's role. They have to sign on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to close the session. A couple quick final thoughts. You might want to think about the language of cultural policy and developing the comfort amongst yourselves in this state using that language so you have efficient communication in the development of cultural policy. Secondly, it's very possible that although there are many disincentives in state government to the development of effective macro-cultural policy, you could certainly develop a stealth cultural policy that was extremely effective. We'll take a break.
We've had that for years, so.
And thank you to our panel. We'll do the same as we did before. We'll try to convene people relatively quickly to move to the third panel.